So let me go to unit 4. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to create a folder here. React State. And in this folder, I'm going to initialize a React app. How do we initialize a React app? React app. I'm going to call it like state demo app. This is initializing my React app, doing this configuration, installing the dependencies, and all that. This is like one of the advantages of Code Sandbox is that if you wanted to do something quick, you don't have to run this, and you can just create a sandbox real quick and have a React app running there. Cool. So we have our app. Let's open that with code. Let me close this. Let's see if let me get rid of some stuff that I have here. Let me post this if you want to join and see my files directly with VS Code. But basically here we have this Bootstrap React app. Let's run it. Let's go to the terminal. Let me see, why do I have so many things open? Let's open the terminal here. npm start. Spin up that app. Cool. Everyone has their React app spinning. Remember that you can do it in Code Sandbox. It's an alternative. But cool. So the first thing that I want to do here is let's go back. This. And then I'm gonna get rid of all this stuff like that React comes with on the app. Just leave the div. And let's say I'm gonna have like a p tag with a number that, let's say, will start at 0, and then I'm gonna have a button. This button will say click me. It have a p tag with a 0 and a button that says click me. Then maybe let me close this, put this to the side, and then let me bring back Chrome, put it here to the side, and we have this. This button doesn't do anything. At some point, we want this button to increase this number. For that, we're going to use state. But before that, we need to do some changes and create our state. So, do you remember that we talked about, like, and this is going to be a common theme, like through our React unit, there are like two kinds of components. What are those two kinds? Even though we haven't like seen them explicitly, but I talked briefly about them yesterday. Join. Right. Yes, we have these two. We can write components as a function, and we can write components as a class. Right. Now, only class components. This is very important. Only class components can have state. Only class components can have state, because it turns out that state is going to be an actual property in that component, an instance property. Functional components cannot have state. And this will just sort of keep that in mind. It might not make a lot of sense at the beginning. Just remember that class components can have state. Functional components cannot have state. And if you keep that sort of like in the background, hopefully it will start making sense as we progress. So what I want to do is turn this app component that is currently a functional component and turn it into a class component. So who could guide me through like refactoring this component to be a class component? Sure.
Class app extends React.
Class app
Extends
React dot component.
And then the curly braces.
Curly braces.
Get rid of the function.
Curly braces get rid of the function. Okay.
And then you need a render
And then I need a render method. And a constructor later on. But if we do this, then we see that if we refresh, we have basically the same app. This is we turn that functional component app, and we turn it into a class component. Also, this component, since the class components are the ones that are the only ones that can have state, we call these components sometimes stateful components. We call them stateful components sometimes. So, in fact, this is a more meaningful name than just class components, but just keep sort of those keywords in mind. So, if we have a class component, but never we say like this is gonna be the state, then it's just a class component. It's not really like a stateful component. So let's add a state to this component. So for being able to add a state, we will need to have the constructor that we briefly saw yesterday. So the constructor And since the class app is extending from React.component, we need to call the constructor in the super class or in the parent class. Therefore, we need to call super as well here. And then we're going to have a very special property, this.state equal to an empty object. Is like 9 out of 10 going to be an object. It could be a primitive like a string or a number. But 9 out of 10 is going to be an object. So now we have a stateful component because it literally has state. And this is a very special like name on React, the state property of a component. So this is like what I was trying to represent here, where we have like our app represented by this bigger circle, and somewhere in our app we have a space for state. And in here we're gonna store variables, or we're gonna store like properties, keys. And in here is where your posts are gonna live, where our counter for this app is gonna live, where the likes for your posts, etc., are going to live. So for now, let's initialize state with a counter that starts at 0, like this. Counter colon 0, because we are in an object, and don't add the semicolon as I did. So we are sort of like initializing the state of this component to be an object with one property, counter, that is equal to 0. And that by itself doesn't make this work automatically. We have to connect all the rest of the pieces. But I want to show you how you can inspect the state using the React developer tools. If you haven't installed the React developer tools, just Google React developer tools and install that extension. The React developer tools are going to be very helpful because they let us see inside our components and see the state of such components. So just sort of to verify that I added a state to my app component, what I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect. Then I'm going to look for the tab called React, or actually it was called React before, now it's called like components. And so far we only have like one component. We only have the app component, right? So I'm going to click on app, and then I can see two things. We're going to see props later, but I can see more importantly state here. And we can see that state starts at 0. So let's verify that you are able to see, if you have the same code that I have, that when you open the React developer tool, you're able to see your state initialized at 0. So inspect your state on the React developer tools.
Yeah.
Make sure you see, like, maybe check on whoever is next to you. You should see that the state of the app component has a property called counter that starts at 0.
Oh, you have to restart.
so far about how we add a state to our component. And why do we want to have like the count in the state? Yes. Yes. This is sort of like the having that everything. Whenever you're thinking of your apps, anything that is going to change like over time by user interaction is going to live in the state. So if you have posts that are receiving likes, they're going to live in the state. The stuff that never changes, like let's say our headers or just like static information, we don't want to put in the state. But yes, the reason why we want a counter here is because it's going to change. We're going to make it change. So then the next question is, how do we make it change? So there's a few things. So one is, we need to, let's say, so we want to connect this button so that when we click, we change the state, right? And once we change the state, then we can have that number increase. So let's do something first. Let's break it down into like how to add, like adding an event listener, like add event listener, and then in React, and then modify state. So first of all, how do we do like how do we do adding event listeners to a button in regular DOM manipulation? Hugo. Okay, so you want to grab, let's say I grab this button with, what are some of the ways in which we can grab the button? Query selector or get element by ID. Okay, and I have my element, and then what do I do with it in the regular way? Add event listener, right? That's the way that we do it, like in regular DOM manipulation. And under the hood, React will do the same thing. But React will do that like that. React will do sort of like the query selector for us, and we'll do the add event listener for us. What we do here is much more simpler. What we can do here is in the button element, we can pass something called onClick. And we say onClick curly brackets. So this sort of goes back to even before add event listener, that you could say like, you could on the element and on the button itself, you could say like onClick and then specify a function. This sort of goes back to that. So in here, in this curly brackets, what we can put is any JavaScript, and we want to put like a function that will be fired when we click. So let's do this. So I'm going to have a function here. Inside of my class, not in my constructor, basically as a class method. I'm going to call this function handle click. This is a very common pattern, handle click. And I'm going to do it in ES6 like this.
Since it's inside a class, don't you like not need it?
You mean like why I don't have const or let? Or what do you mean like?
Because if you look at ES6, the classes, we give a function, just the function name and parentheses.
Oh, yeah. So we can write this function like this too. Yes, these two are fine ways.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, there is.
I've never seen that before.
You have never seen it like this way.
Yeah, inside a class.
Yeah, these two are the same thing. There is like one technical difference that we're gonna get to see later. It's something about the this keyword. Yeah. So let's do it ES6. So handle click, and then in here I'm just gonna say console log. The button was clicked. Well, and then React breaks because I can't just have empty curly brackets, but that's no problem. Because in those curly brackets, what I want to put is my function. I want to pass my function with this that handle click to my button. Say that again? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we don't want to invoke it. Like, we just want to give the function to the button for whenever the click happens. Whenever the click happens, then the function gets called. It gets invoked then. Like, we can see what happens if we invoke it here. But with this, React will do the adding event listener for me, and then I just need to say this. Button on click, what do I want to happen on click? I want this to happen. I want this function called handle click to happen whenever a user clicks this button. So let's save that. Now let's go to our console and let's click our button and see if it works. Cool. We have added an event listener to our button using React. Questions about this? Our button is just console login for now. But once we have a console login, we can have it do anything we want. Yes, sorry.
Is it normal that the render is inside the class?
Yes, the render is inside of the class because our class has, at this point, it has two methods, the handle click and the render function. Every class component must have always a render function, a render method. So the button was clicked. Other questions? Everyone saw the console log appearing as we click the button. Okay, so this is basically how this is very common. You're going to be doing this a lot of the time. Like, this is how we're going to do adding event listeners to our elements in React. What other events can we listen for? In the regular HTML, CS, JavaScript, yeah. On change. What's another one? A little bit more. Submit. You're gonna have on change instead of submit. On change. On submit in a form. On hover, I think on hover will be like on mouse over. Yeah, that will be sort of like the equivalent. And there's all the events. So if you remember for our unit 2, DOM events list. There are quite a list of events that you can listen for. And you can listen for all these events in the same way in these ones. Abort, blur, can play, click, copy, cut, drag, etc. For the most part, we will be doing like the basics, like click, change, and so on. Yeah, like if events are core to what we're doing as web developers because it allows to, that's how we get basically user input through events that a user is generated on a page by turning knobs or dragging sliders, clicking, hovering. Events are that tunnel of communications between our app and the user. So going back to this, we have our button. On click, then you click it. When you're passing, so here we call this function, the handle click, we will call it like, it's an event listener because when the event happens, the function gets invoked, right? So we say that the handle click is an event listener, and we're passing, later on, the name for these kind of things are called props, or for property. We pass like the onClick property to be our event handler, handle click. We're gonna expand on props later on. And yeah, other like questions or comments before we see how to change the state once we have this function. What is like a difference between this event listener that we gave the button compared to the other event listeners that we were giving the buttons manually with add event listener that you may notice? Yes, Michael. That is, well, that we put it like sort of in the HTML, that's correct. Okay, yeah, like the fact that we have like handle click being a method in the class versus just like a global function that we have in our JavaScript. Just like, and don't forget this, just like in the regular event listener functions, when the event gets, when the event happens, we receive the event object in the arguments to the function. Do you remember that? So you can do like event.target.whatever to see, like, to know where the event happened. This event listeners have the same thing. So in here you receive the event. Let's console log the event for now. So let's see, button was clicked, an event. When we click, we see the event. This object that we see next to our string represents the event, and it has a bunch of properties. One such property, I think, is the target. Well, and it doesn't display here. The event object in React can be a little bit confusing, especially because like the properties don't expand correctly. That is because this is like this is not like a real event. Like there is a wrapper that like React puts on it, but it will still, like, for the most part, it still works as the regular. So if we do like event.target, we should see the button, you know, who was the target of that event, right? And then from there, once we have the target, we can access the inner text, all the node properties, etc. Right? Cool. Questions about the event being passed to our event listeners? So, yes. That is a good question. So the question is like, if the event listener have access to the target, can the event listener then like keep adding functionality, maybe adding like other event listeners, maybe changing the inner text? The answer is yes, it could do that. However, we don't do it very often in React. In fact, it's sort of like when we're doing, we don't want to do like straight DOM manipulation when we're doing React. We want React to do that for us. So I could add, like I could do add event listener here, but this is like the, this will be like modifying the DOM directly, and where I could just use React. Cool. So we have our event listener logging something. We know that it's going to be called because we have it specified as the onClick property here in the button. Now let's see how we can actually change the state and what that will cost. So first of all, let's update the state. So for updating the state, for modifying, so we saw how to add the event listener. Now let's see how to modify the state when the user clicks on something. To modify the state, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the all state. So let's say the declare variable here, let counter equal. So I'm going to pull sort of like the previous value that we had. The previous value is in the instance. So we need to say this that state that counter. And let's just sort of like console log this for now. Counter. So we just see if we are actually accessing the state correctly. When I click, I get number 0. So we are accessing the state correctly. I guess, yeah, that's another thing. So to access the state, you just do it like this. You know, this is what we call like reading from the state. So there's like 2 operations. One is reading from the state, reading what is there, and then the other one will be like writing or modifying what is there. Now, reading from the state, we could just do it like this. You could think that we could do something like, let's say, if we want to modify it, actually, let's see the correct way first, which is this. So if we want to modify the state, there is a special function that all React's components have for such thing. Very accurate name, this function is the this.setState function. Now the setState function takes in one argument, and this argument is a new state. So basically, we start with this state, which is an object with one property, counter at 0, and now to this.setState, we need to pass a new state in this fashion. So if our state is an object here, we need to pass an object to this.setState, and we can pass this new state. I want it to be counter equal to whatever it was before, counter plus 1. I keep forgetting that it's not equal, it's colon. So something like this. So first I get what was in the state before, I get the counter, and then I'm going to say this.setState. Now I want to set this new state. My state is now going to be like from 0 to 0 plus 1, which is 1. Questions regarding this before we see like working and actually modifying our state? So let's look at, this is still not going to work. In fact, this 0, we haven't connected this to our state. We haven't connected this like number here. But if we go on our React developer tools on components and we inspect our only component, which is app, we see our state starting at 0. And when we click, if we did this correctly, we see our state updating. You can see it here, very tiny. Updating counter to 6. And this is kind of weird. You may notice that if you click it really fast, it just jumps directly to that number. So we are able to change the state, which is great. Questions so far? Yes?
This is just locally saved, right? So if you refresh the page, it resets the count.
Yes, that's a good point. If I refresh the page, I inspect app, counter goes back to 0. Yes. Locally saved. Yes, Joy?
Is that delay gonna be, is that gonna be there also when we?
The delay is like only like for us. It's only like the developer tools. It is actually changing on time. Yeah. Other questions? Everyone was able to get their state to change. So remember that to modify the state, you will always need to call this function, this.setState. I'll encourage you to go to the documentation and like, read more about it, because this is one very important function. Yes, Malik?
What would happen if you did?
What would happen if I didn't put in a function? So that's a good question. So let's say this is where you could think, oh, we could change the state if we do something like this. This.state that counter is equal to the counter plus 1. Right? You could think that, it's just a property, it's just an object in the state, and we could set it like this. I hope this doesn't work. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because this is not the way that we set state in React. We never want to like mutate the state directly. We always want to do it with set state. Set state is doing some fancy stuff under the hood that later on we're going to appreciate a little bit more. Yeah. Yes?
Is that anything similar to the instance?
To the instance, what do you mean by that?
Because usually when we have classes, we usually have an instance.
Uh-huh.
So is set, like this that set state similar to that?
Oh yeah, you see how we do here, like extend from React component. This is a great point. So we do here extend from React component, right? So it turns out that then our app will inherit everything that a React component has, right? And one of those things is the this.setState function. This.setState. We see that we ourselves don't have a set state defined, right? We only have handle, click, and render. We don't have a set state that we declare and we define. This set state came from the parent class that our app instance inherited. And you see how we can say this, like this is the one that we created. We call it in the instance this.handle, click. And this one, set state, we're also calling in the instance, but it's just that we didn't define the set state. It comes from extending the React component class. That's also why we need to extend from the React component class. If we don't extend from the React component class, then we don't have a component, we don't have a set state to modify its state. Other questions or observations? Okay, so this is all cool, but then how do we have like our app refresh, right? Like how do we have actually something changing in the page? So it turns out that our app is refreshing. Your app will always refresh when you set the state. Let me do like a diagram next, but let me show you that if we do this. So one, just remember that you cannot set the state directly. You need to use the set state. To modify the state. Now, I'm telling you that every time we set the state, our app is refreshing. Or not our app, our component, which in this case is just one and it's called app. So our app is refreshing, and we can see that if we put in the render. Let's see like how is that refreshing. So you can put in our render at console log. Console.log render was called. Render was called. And then let's go to the console. And then when you refresh the page, you immediately see that one console log saying render was called. This is because React, when it's first instantiating your app, will call render to display the thing, right? Display your component. So that call, the render was, when we invoked and our component was actually made, basically. Now, if I click, render is called again. And if I click again, it's called again. So now, we could think of like set state. This set state has a side effect, right? The side effect is re-rendering the app, re-rendering the component, which is a good side effect. So this set state does two things. Let's see where do I put this. This set state updates. Update states, and sort of like as a consequence of the updating of the state, the component is re-rendered. So let's call it fire re-render. So whenever you set the state, your component will re-render, and that is a good thing. That is what is gonna let us do a lot of interactive stuff. So if we keep that in mind, if we keep the fact that whenever we set the state, render will be called, then we could just in render access the state to display the new state. So what we can do then now, instead of hardcoding this 0 here, what we do is I'm going to put in some JavaScript in here. I always like to separate my variables here at the top. So I'm going to bring in the counter from the state here. Counter equal this state counter. And then I'm going to say counter here. Let's see. So we get back our 0, but now this 0 is not coming from the hard-coded 0 in the p tag. Now this 0 is coming from our state. You remember that our state starts with counter 0? Now if we think about when we fire this click event, the state is going to be updated. The state is going to be updated. The update will call render again, and we're going to see the new counter, because counter now after the state has been updated is 1. Let's refresh this page, click, and we have version 0.1 of the cookie clicker. So, yes, questions? Like, yeah, an infinite loop. So maybe check with your classmates that their app is working. If you have any questions, raise your hand. That's interesting. There's always being made by people. That's cool.
Yeah, this is way more quicker than that voice.
Right. Even in the way that I'm doing it, but it's fine for us to think about it this way. Wait, did you start today? Just started. And you're gonna be there for months. So let's think about how this works. I like to draw sort of like a circle. Yes, you.
How come there's no delay when you click it on the page? So when we're clicking before it, I just have a delay in my page.
Yeah, that's just a delay in the developer controls. But on the pages in the so one thing that I wanted you to think about, that somebody reminded me, is how would you do this in regular HTML and JavaScript? Just think about how you have the same counter. Think about where would you store the counter? How would you add the ML listener? How would you change it?
Oh no. It's on the phone.
That's crazy. What is that? Crash a computer? I don't get it. What is happening?
So you find this in the
How many clicks?
He started buying power-ups.
But then you have to like keep buying them.
Yeah. That's how it gets you. It's interesting how we like numbers going out, and this is what that game is all about. Seeing a number going out when you're always like looking for the next bigger number.
I just press the cursor and it's just gonna keep.
And then at some point you could have like thousands of cursors. So the way in which I like to think about like the setting the state, calling a read render, is if I like drawing sort of like a circle. So we know that like set state. Set state is going to update the state. Like let's draw the state here as an object. It's going to update the state. Then updating the state internally, we'll call render. Call render. And that's it. But we can see here that we could have what would happen like in this drawing? What happens if I call set state inside of render? It's going to be an infinite loop. In fact, let's do like call the function handle click. Call the function handle click in the inside of the render. So what happens if you call the function that handle click inside of the render? Maximum update exceeded? That's because your counter is going really fast. And then React just says, oh, you probably didn't mean that. And then it throws your. So that is something to like keep in mind, that you never want to set state. You never want to set state on your render function. So like in here, if I do this that handle click, which is the function that is going to set the state. And I say that. Then after some time, my React app will crash saying maximum update depth exceeded. This can happen when a component repeatedly calls set state. Inside component will update, and some other stuff we haven't seen. React limits the number of nested updates to prevent infinite loops.
That's a good explanation.
Yeah, like React errors are a little bit more descriptive. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, like sort of like if we think of like set state will alter the state or will modify the state, and then the state changing causes a render. And this is the circle in which, again, a user will set another state, another part of state, and then when the state changes, a new render is produced, because the render function just gets called. Any computation that we have in the render will happen, like accessing the state on the counter. And then we have our cookie clicker version 0.1. So any questions about updating the state or state in general? It's kind of hard to see here like completely because the screen just doesn't fit. But we have our component, in this case just one. It is a very small component, has a state that we must define in the constructor, like this. We don't forget to call super there. Then we have a function. This is just a regular function. This function will call set state. What's important, what's remarkable about this function is that is the one that is going to call set state, and that is the one that is being passed as the onClick property to the button. That's the question? Cool. And then here, so in this, because when we update the state, a re-render happens, a render is called again. We just in our render, we're just rendering a brand new component basically with the updated information, right? And you may think, well, like rendering a brand new component can be like expensive and inefficient, but when this is like done in scale, and we remember about like when React is like comparing the virtual DOM with the actual DOM, then and if it's a big app, then it becomes efficient, right? Because it's gonna only re-render the parts of the app that change. Questions, comments? So let me give you like 10 minutes to now add a button that is going to subtract from the counter. So one that is adding, let's call this one, instead of click me, call like add. Now add a button next to this one that is like subtract or something like that, and that is going to take one away from the state, from the counter in state.
Yeah. So this one you can do like with that and you can then add with the method part that you say was it the add function or the subtract function? That's one way.
I mean, this is essentially the same thing.
Go native.
So, any questions, thoughts, or ideas for the subtract button?
Do you want it to stop at 0 or keep going to the number? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter. Yeah, like it's up to us. So let's say let's add that one here. Like copy this. I'll do like plus and minus. So we have plus, add, and minus. Minus at this moment is increasing because it's calling the same function, right? So we could have like let's have a function called handle minus maybe. Minus click equal this, and then let counter equal this state counter, and then let's do this. That set state. Remember that this is the valid way in which you can set the state, and then do counter equal counter minus 1. Then we just use this function here. Handle click, handle minus click, refresh. We now go down, and we can come back up. Hugo, I think you had a question.
I was gonna make an observation, like, I know,
Yep.
in most, like, shopping sites, they have, like, a counter.
Mm.
Not like a counter, just, like, something to, like, there's something like a quantity of what you want to buy.
Like how many you want to buy? Yeah, yeah. This could be like a way we can think of implementing that. Yeah, like in a shopping cart, how many potatoes do you want, or I don't know what. Or yeah, etc. So questions about setting the state, how that causes a re-render. This is the core of React. Setting the state and the app updating as we change the state. This is how everything that we're gonna be doing in React works. When you get posts, you're gonna set the state. Let's say you did a new somebody liked your post. What you're gonna do, like in your app, is you're gonna send that network request to your backend to like add that click in the backend, but also update a counter like this one on your state to immediately reflect that new like that happened, etc. Let me see what we have here. Yeah. Things to remember is that we don't call the functions here. You don't want to do this because this will invoke the function immediately. And I think since it's gonna invoke the function immediately, then we're gonna get that error again, which is too many updates were happening, and React stopping that because that's probably not what you wanted. So remember that you don't want to call that there. Remember that here you need the this keyword to refer to a function that is within the class, and so on. Let's see what else. Oh, so this is gonna be very common. Like this is doing stuff like this, like accessing the state, or let's say like this. This is sort of like developer mind in like place, which is people saw, oh, we're repeating here ourselves saying counter and counter. And that small repetition they wanted to get rid of. And then they created this, which is object destructuring, which works like this. Let counter equal this dot state. So these two lines work exactly the same. And this is known as object destructuring. Which is really, really handy for avoiding repetition. They saw, oh, this is counter 2 times, that's too much. Let's get it down to 1. So if I comment this line and I leave this one, my app still works because they are the same thing. So what this is doing, is saying, I'm interested in the counter key of the this.state object, and I want to create a variable with that same name. This is known as object destructuring. It's super handy. This is an I think this is ES6, yeah, ES6 feature. Destructuring assignment. Let's look.
Inside the functions?
Yeah, anywhere. And it's my recommendation that you start using it. Let's see an example. You could even do it with arrays. So let's look at it with objects first. Yeah, so sort of like this example, where we have an object O that has 2 properties P and Q. P is 42 and Q is true. What we can do is, let's say I want to have 2 variables P and Q. I could do curly brackets P comma Q equal to O, and what that ends up doing is creating a variable P that will hold the value of the key P, and create another variable called Q that is going to be holding the value of basically object.Q. And when we console log P, we get 42, Q we get true. Qable. Object destructuring here. Or destructuring assignment.
In a larger object, you can also set a certain number Like let's say the object has like 6 keys.
Uh-huh.
You only want 3 of them. You can set those 3 equal to another variable by saying like equals, like you write the name equals the brackets and then the 3 keys.
Mm.
And then you say equals and then the object that you're extracting from.
Huh. That's a use case that I haven't seen. But like basically setting the same value for multiple keys, right? So like let's look at an example here in Node. Let's go to Node and then let's create an object like obj equal. Let's say this is an object that has 2 properties: color, red, and let's say another property, price, 3.1. So now we have an object obj with those 2 properties. If I'm interested in, like, let's say I want to save the color property to a variable, we could do this like const or let color equal obj.color, right? And if I inspect now color, now we have red. But even better, what we can do is I cannot reset color. So let's do const color this is gonna fail because I already have my color variable. So let's sort of do yeah, I declare my color variable, so I cannot do like the object destructuring now because that variable is already used. So this is like one way. Let's restart Node again. Let's declare our object again. So if I'm only interested in the color key and to declare a variable, we could do const color, sort of like from this object. What this will do is that it will create a variable color, and it will put the content or the value of that variable will be the value of object.color. So if I do color, we get red, and so on. And we can do this with multiple keys at once, or with one at a time. Yeah. It's gonna be very handy for like when we have in state, we have like a few things, not only like a counter, but let's say we have like the login information, the messages of the user, and some posts, right? This structuring will be helpful in that end. And this is something that this doesn't apply to React alone. You know, we were doing in Node here. All right. This is just like a nice ES6 feature that we hadn't seen before. Object destructuring. It also works with arrays. So like, let's say if we have, you do object destructuring with curly brackets, arrays with square brackets. So if you have an array, say 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say you want to, like, you're interested in the first 2. What you can do is, let's say const first, comma 2 or second equal array. Now first, the variable first will have the element at index 0 or the first element, and the variable second will have the element at index 1 or the second one. First, second.
So if you wanted the third one?
If you wanted the third one, then I will need to include it here. Like comma third, comma. From here, like with this like this array destructuring, I can't really, unless I had it included here initially.
Well, I mean, you could just simply call for it.
It's not because the variable you're putting first and second in there, right? Like if you did const third, fourth, you can still
Mhm.
get one as third.
That's correct. Yeah, these variables are not like I could have like const A, B, C from array. What this is gonna do is gonna sort of extract or destructure the array into like the first element will be put in a variable A, the second element will be put in a variable B, and the third element will be put in a variable C. So if I do this, then I do A is the first one, B is the second one, C is the third one. The third like element in the array.
So you can only do in sequence from the beginning.
That's a very good observation. Yes, you can only do in sequence from the beginning. Yes. That is when we're doing arrays, because arrays are order lists. But when we're doing object, it doesn't matter what object. It doesn't matter what key, basically. I could have, going back to this one, I could have the price key, like const price equal obj price. Yeah. Because hash maps, objects, hash tables are unordered collection of data. It doesn't matter the order. That's a question? Yep. Yeah, that is that's another ES6 feature called spread operator. The spread operator, because it spreads elements. That one we can sort of like touch on it. Let's see. I think that was. Let me look at an example here. Yeah, like read this article on MDM, the Destructuring assignment. Just share it on Slack right now. Really helpful for doing that, and it's very really handy. And then maybe accompanying that, you could look into this spread operator. This is another spread syntax. This one is a little bit I think a little bit harder to grasp, but let's sort of look at it real quick. So we could do console log. So we have an array, right? We do console.log array, we get the array that we had, right? What we do, we could spread this one. What this is gonna do is gonna sort of get rid of the array and leave the elements alone. So let's see if this works. Yeah. And then we have this, which is not the array. So let's do let spread array equal okay. So we cannot we cannot just spread an array like that. I think maybe if we do let A comma B comma C comma D. No, it doesn't work either. But the spread operator, these three dots, that's what it's called, is good for making copies of arrays and objects, mostly. That's what I have used it mostly for. So let's say if you want to create a copy of array, let's do let copy array. You can't really do this, or if you do this, it ends up that both arrays are actually the same one. You're not creating a copy. This goes back to to
use the spread operator to send the object into you say if you have an object with 5 keys,
Mm-hmm.
the brackets and that object.
And it will create, but it will save the values or the properties. But like, is the example?
Object have values or do you values?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You can also turn string into array.
With the spread operator. Let's see. Well, actually, let me show you this example first. So if we do let copy array equal array, it turns out that we didn't really create a copy of the array. What we have is like, we just have two references to the array. So we have like, we have our array, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this goes back sort of related to pointers, where what we have is like, when we do like let array equal this, somewhere in like physically in the memory of your computer, these numbers are put together, and the computer sort of gives you back a reference to that, which we call array. So you can say like array is pointing to the location in memory where that array exists. When I do like copy of array is equal to array, I'm basically saying copy of array is pointing to the array. And what is array pointing to? Array is just pointing to the actual array in memory. So this is not really a copy of the array. If I do copy array equal array, and we can verify if we do array triple equal copy array, we get true. That is because it's the same array. They're not copies. Because you can see that if you do this, like an array of 2 elements, triple equal the same array, you're always gonna get false. And this is correct. This is correct behavior. Because these 2 arrays are not the same. They are 2 arrays, they have the same content, but they're not the same. They are in 2 different places in memory. They can be like close, or they can be far in the memory of your computer. So a very good use case for like making a copy of an array is the spread operator. So what we can do is, so we saw that array and copy of array are not really a copy, but if we do, let's say copy of array, what we want it to be is equal to a new array where we spread the all array. So like, that's why it's called like spread operator, because it's like spreading the elements, like spreading butter over your bread. So spreading the elements on an array, and it's just sort of like wrapping them in a new array with this square bracket. So if we do this, now let's try to do like array triple equal copy array. We get false, right? It's a copy. Copy array is a true copy of the array. Now they're different because there's 2 arrays on separate places in memory. So if this is what we had before, when we did copy of array spread, what we did was like actually the computer in memory somewhere else, it created an array with the same elements. That's sort of like, we're gonna start using like the spread operator as we see necessary, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about it. For now, just like the state is the most important part, and then maybe remembering that these 2 are the same thing: the let counter versus the structuring the property. So that's that. I think let's go out for lunch. Then after that, I'm gonna see if I missed anything. Just come back. We see that, and then we go working in the lab, which is setting the state basically. Mm-hmm.
Sure.